to go back up those steps, my hips and things just like almost felt tired. So by my third trip up those stairs, I felt like I wasn't gonna make it. Mind you, I'm like 11 and a half, 12 years old. I just I felt like I wasn't gonna make it up these steps. And I stopped. I came in through the side door and I went up the first set of stairs. There's like 6, 7 steps right there. And then you turn to your right. And when you look up, there's another like 8 steps there. And then when you get up those steps, you turn to your right and there's another set. And then you turn and there's another set when you get to before you get to the top. I come through the side door and I got up that first set of steps. When I went to make that turn to go up the next set of steps, I made it up to the third step and I was just standing there. And my mom had gone upstairs and had come back down. As she was coming down, she tapped me on the arm to ask me what I was doing. She was walking past me. She was trying to get my attention. And she was like, "Baby, what you doing?" And she tapped me on the arm. When she tapped me on the arm, I burst into tears. And she was like, "What are you crying about?" I was like, "That hurts." Her simply tapping me on the arm was so painful. It felt like she had punched me in the arm. And I was bawling. I was like, "That hurts. That is hurting me. My hips are hurting. You touching me is hurting. This hurts." So they stopped everything and she was like, "She's going to the hospital right now." So she called my doctor, and Dr. Richard told her that she would come in for her to just bring me over to her office. And they took me over, and I remember it was the first time I had ever had MRIs and extensive x-rays and all this stuff done. And then they had to make appointments for me to go in and have all these other tests done. And then they told my mother probably about a week later, because I had all that week, they had been making these emergency appointments for me to go get blood drawn. I had to go get these x-rays done. And then they saw something in my blood work that made me have to go back and get some other tests done. So it would be like the following week before they would finally tell my mom, "Oh, well, she's got rheumatoid arthritis. She's got juvenile rheumatoid arthritis and has probably had it all this time and they just never caught it." So they started treating me for that. And in the process of treating me for that, and mind you, this was over the summer. In the process of treating me for that, I started having like other issues that they basically contributed to the medication they were giving me, and they thought maybe the medication was too strong, so they started to dial it back a little bit. And they noticed that these other problems that I was having, like I would feel unusually tired. Like I wasn't sleeping, but my body would just feel like at any moment it was going to collapse. And I used to have this issue with, I would pass out. Like I would black out. It would be standing somewhere perfectly fine. Nothing is wrong with me. And the next thing you know, I am kissing the floor. And first they said that it was because I was having issues with my iron, which wasn't shocking because my mom used to have iron shots when she was little, which are horrific, mind you. And they were thinking, okay, well, my mother is a horrible anemic. That is probably happening to me as well. Now they did ultimately find out that I was anemic, but that was not what was causing what was happening to me. So they started me on iron pills on top of the other medication I was already taking. And even at a young age, I knew once it was just too much for me. Like I knew when anything that I was doing, when it started to feel like it was overwhelming and it was just too much, it was like, okay, I quit. I've always been like that. I will probably always be that way. When something feels like it is too much for me, I'm over it. And I distinctly remember getting up one morning and now school is back in. And my mom is telling me I have to take these pills and I have to do this and I had to take this doctor's note and I had to pass it around to all my teachers and principals because I would have to leave class a few minutes before other kids so that I wasn't in a hallway with tons of people because I couldn't have people bumping into me, and I had to go down to the nurse's office during certain times and I had to take medication. And I remember I don't even think I made it halfway through the school year before I was like, okay, I'm completely over this at this point. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I flushed my medication. My mother, of course, had a whole fit and told me I could not do that, that I had to have this medication. And I was like, I don't think I do. And she was telling me, yeah, you have to take it. And I'm like, no, something in my gut is telling me I don't have to do this. But again, I'm like 11, 12 years old. I can't argue with my mom about taking medication, but I knew I wasn't meant to take it. Like, this just felt wrong. So they ended up taking me back to get new meds and explain to my doctor what I did. Well, when they went to take me in, she did not write me the scripts for the medication right off because they had been noticing something. Because I went to a lot of doctor's appointments during that time. They had been noticing something every time they would do blood draws and things on me. So she wanted to check something out. Now, at this point, they find out that I actually also have chronic fatigue syndrome. So they send me to another doctor, and that doctor tells my family doctor, Dr. Richter, something about this girl's case is off because one minute I'll come in and I test positive for everything under the sun, and they could bring me back in 2 weeks later and I'm perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with me. And he was like, either the tests are off or something's not right. So they were setting up appointments and I was going to specialists all over New York. Like every time I turned around, it was a doctor's appointment. I had to go see this specialist and I had to go see this person. And then my mother, for anybody who's listened to those podcasts as well, my mom went from being a drug addict to being a workaholic. So it had gotten to the point where my mother had now been picking up shifts to the point where, and I've told people this before, when my mother was on her way to work at 3 p.m., I was just coming home from school. And when I was getting up to leave to go to school, my mother was just coming in from work. So we would see each other in passing all school year. So it had gotten to the point where now I'm like coming up on 13 and I'm going to doctor's appointments by myself. I know all my doctors. I know how to get anywhere in the city on my own. So she would make appointments. My mom couldn't be there. A couple of dental appointments, my brother went with me. But most of my doctor's appointments, I would say 95% of my doctor's appointments behind this, I went to by myself. And then I would just bring the notes and stuff back so my mom could read them, which made it easier for me to do what I wanted to do because now I can take scripts but never take them to the pharmacy to get filled. I could show my mom some of the paperwork, but not all of the paperwork. And she would never really realize it until, like I said, my doctor and my mom were actually friends until they would talk to each other later on. And then she put two and two together. And then it got to the point where I was older by the time I was, 15, 16 years old. And I was really handling everything by myself. At that point, I was even, my mom worked private nursing cases at that time, and their paychecks weren't, and this was, years ago in like the 80s, their paychecks weren't direct deposited, and because of the job she had, she was getting paid she had a private patient, and that patient's lawyer was actually paying my mother and everybody else on staff, so they actually had to go to a lawyer's office to pick up their checks. I was actually like paycheck runner. So I was actually the person who went down, verified that all the checks were correct, picked them all up and brought them back to disperse them. That was my job in the summers. So by that point, I'm picking up paychecks. My name is listed at the bank. I'm cashing my mom's check. I'm going down and paying the water bill, paying the light bill. I'm going with my grandparents to grocery shop for our house, making sure we got food. I'm making sure the house is clean, making sure my mom's uniforms are ready for work. Food is cooked. Like, I'm legit. And I always tell people, if you knew me then, you would understand why I am the way I am now. I ran my house. Nobody could tell me anything. And not, like I was a horrible teen. You can't tell me nothing. I'm a mouth off kind of thing. I mean, I was like basically the adult in my house, because my mom had a lot of issues, and the one thing she knew to do was to go to work, and outside of that she had a hard time functioning. So I actually became the adult in my house. So anything that needed to be done, even as we got older, and my brother was rather, because my brother is deceased, my brother was 5 years older than me, and my brother would get into trouble. I was the one who had to go down and make sure, okay, well, what did he do? And well, let me, like, I for real became in charge of my house and my family at a very young age. My father did not live in the same state that we did. And somebody had to look out for my mother because, like I said, outside of working, she had a hard time dealing with just day to day things. And my brother was going through a phase where he was being a hellion. There's like no other way to put that. Absolutely love my brother. Me and my brother were thick as thieves, tight as all outside. But he was going through the things he was going through. And then he went off to the military. And it was just me and my mom. So I took care of everything. So by the time we had gotten into that stage of life, I didn't even bother to bring doctor's notes back to my mother. I would just go to my doctor's appointments and I would sit and read up, or I'd go to the library and read up on what they told me and make sure that I understood everything in my paperwork, because these doctor's appointments will go on for years, of them trying to figure out what was going on with me. Now, to jump back into what I was talking about, by the time I was about probably 13, 14 years old, now at this point, I've been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and they're still trying to figure out why sometimes I test positive and sometimes I don't. So as they're going back and forth, they end up sending me to this doctor by the name of Dr. Green. And Dr. Green worked at a hospital that was maybe 2 blocks away from my grandparents' house. So I would go see Dr. Green, and then I would go over see my grandparents, and then I would go home. So on this particular day, I go over to see Dr. Green because he's been running tests on me and getting blood work and doing all these things. And he's been trying to watch it and figure out like what is happening and reporting back to my doctor, because I'm still under Dr. Richter. She was my family doctor until I moved away. And she was even, I have 2 children. She was even their doctor up until they were like 2 and 4. But I go to see him one day, and he tells me I have to go down to the emergency room. And I'm like, why am I going to the emergency room? And at this point, I'm like 15 and a half, 16 years old, somewhere up in there. And I'm like, why am I going to the emergency room? He was like, you really need to go to the emergency room. And this was after he'd done some blood work on me, sent it off to the lab, told me to come back the next day or the day after because I had to have some scans done. Went in to get these scans done. He was like, I'm going to take these over to the radiologist, and then I'll come back and let you know when you can go home. They take the scans, go do their thing. He comes back. He gives me a piece of paper and tells me I need to go down and see the woman at the desk. I go to see this woman at this desk, and she was like, okay, the doctor wants you to wait down here. He's waiting for your labs to come back over because there was some issues with your scans. Okay, cool. So I give her all the stuff I need to give her. She does the insurance card, charges my mom's insurance and all that other. And then I go and I sit down. And then he comes back down to meet me in this waiting room. And he was like, you have to go over to the ER. And of course, at my age, I'm panicking because why am I going to the ER? And am I actually going home today? So I leave. Like I said, at that age, I was pretty much running my own life. So I did what I felt like doing. And like I said, it was never a bad thing. It was just, I've always had this way about me where it's like, okay, I have to follow my gut. I have to follow my spirit on this one. And I've always been like that. So when my gut is telling me you don't need to walk into this by yourself, okay, I'm going to go over to the ER, but I'm going to go to the house real quick. So I have a younger sister. My younger sister is 6 years younger than I am. I go to my grandparents' house because that's where she is, and I get her. Now, mind you,